And so we have a demand curve that has an intercept at 14, and then it connects to, so it's at 14.0, and it connects to 6.2 in a straight line. We've got a supply curve that starts at 2 and goes up at a slope of 2. Actually, it goes up at a slope of 4. And so we're asked, suppose demand is D and supply is S0. If a price ceiling of 6 doll hairs was imposed, what are the resulting shortages and what's the full economic price? So the price ceiling of $6. So what does a price ceiling mean? Right, no price higher than this. So the first thing we ask ourselves whenever we have these kind of questions, we ask ourselves, well, is it actually doing anything? Is the price ceiling effective? Yes, it is, right? It's below equilibrium, and so it's binding. If it was above equilibrium and they were saying, you can't charge any price higher than $12, that wouldn't do a dang thing, right? Everyone would be like, yeah, so what? So in order for it to be binding, in order for it to actually matter, it has to be below the equilibrium. So we see that it's below the equilibrium. So what's happening in the situation when the price is below the equilibrium? What happens whenever the price is below the equilibrium? What's the opposite of? So okay, so I don't want to say what's the opposite of consumer surplus. So surplus and consumer surplus are different things. So we'll get back to that in a second. That's a very good distinction. So this is a shortage, right? When the amount demanded, so this is the quantity that's demanded here, right? The quantity that's demanded is 4, and the quantity that's supplied is only 1. So the resulting shortage here is literally just the difference between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. So we're told that the shortage is 3 units. Now what about the next question? What if a price support of $12 was imposed? So now we're asked the situation, what if a price support of $12 or a price floor of $12 was imposed? No price below this price. So now we would have a situation where when the price is artificially high above that equilibrium price where X marks the spot, we're going to end up with a quantity supplied, right? The suppliers are going to be providing 2.5 units. And the people are only going to be demanding 1. Pardon? So there's a surplus. Very good. Yep. And the surplus is equal to the quantity supplied minus the quantity demanded. So that's going to be 2.5 minus 1 to give me 1.5. So then we're asked, suppose that demand and supply are the same and that the equilibrium price is $10. And we're asked what happens if an excise tax is put in place. It's going to take too long. Let's just erase stuff. So what is this excise tax telling us? Since none of you know, we'll ask Google. So a tax on certain things that are being made, sold, or used, a tax similar to sales tax imposed on some goods. So it's just a tax that's imposed on a per unit of production, right? So if it's a tax that's imposed on the per unit of production, how do we represent that graphically? So the excise tax, is going to shift the supply curve upwards by exactly 3 of these squares, because each one of these squares, when we go vertically, is 2, and the excise tax is 6. So it's going to shift the supply curve exactly 3 squares northwards. So this up here, and it's going to go through it. So now instead of 2, it's going to go through 8, right? Because 2 plus 6 is equal to 8, and it's a $6 tax. And then it's going to have the same slope. So that's what it should look like. So what happens to our new equilibrium price? Does it go up or down, BMO? It goes up. Yep, it goes up. So we go from having a equilibrium price and quantity of around 10 and 2 to a new equilibrium and quantity that is at $12, so $2 more expensive, and new equilibrium price, $12, $2 more expensive, new equilibrium quantity, that's 1, which is 1 less than what we had before. Sorry to skip around so much. And so we're asked, what's the price that's paid by the consumers? What's the price? $12. The $12. Very good, Vimo. What's the price that the producers receive? how much do the producers receive? 12 minus 6, exactly. So the producers are only going to get $6 off of everything, right? So producers receive only $6 per unit. So we're then asked, what happens to consumer surplus? So what's the old consumer surplus and producer surplus, and what's the new producer surplus and consumer surplus? So let's get a new graph since this one's getting a little mucky muck. So we're asked, what is the consumer and producer surplus when demands given by D0 and S0 respectively? So what is this asking us? What is this asking us in English before we talk about what it's asking us graphically? What is consumer surplus? So consumer surplus is defined is all of the extra utility enjoyed by consumers above what they paid. So in this particular good, it doesn't matter, what it is, right? It could be skis or ski trips or something. And so what is the demand curve? It's a schedule, right? It's telling us that at certain prices, this is how much people are going to want. And so at $12 or $12,000, right? At $12,000, there's going to be one ski trip that's desired. But the price isn't $12,000, right? The price is $10,000. And so the person who was willing to pay $12,000 but only paid $10,000, they have what's called consumer surplus. So they get a little bit of extra utility, right? So any area that's underneath the demand curve, but that's above where that equilibrium price is, all of this is consumer surplus. So how do we go ahead and calculate that? Well, all three of these triangles make one giant triangle, right? So it's literally the area under the curve, but that's above the price. And seeing as this demand curve is nice and straight, this is nothing more than a triangle, right? And we know the area of a triangle. We know that formula. What's the formula? Whoa, what did I just do there? 1/2 base times height. Very good. So the consumer surplus, when the equilibrium is 10, is going to equal 1/2. Our base of the triangle is 2, right? 2 minus 0 is 2. And the height of the triangle is 14 minus 10 is 4. So we end up with a consumer surplus of 4. Does that make more sense now? So a similar flip side of this is if you are a producer, this supply schedule is telling you the amount of ski trips that you're willing to produce and supply at given prices. And so there's somebody who's willing to provide a ski trip for $6,000. But are they providing it for $6,000? No, they're getting $10,000, right? So all that extra bit right there is their producer surplus. So in a very similar way as the consumer surplus is all of the area below the demand curve above the equilibrium, the producer surplus is all of the area above the supply curve below the equilibrium. And so again, our producer surplus, when P star is equal to 10, is going to be 1/2 base times height. The base is still 2. The height of this is now 10 minus 2 is 8. And so we end up with a producer surplus of 8. And so lastly, we're asked, suppose that the demand is at D and supply is at S0. Would a price ceiling of $2 benefit any consumers? Would that benefit any consumers?
No, right? Because there is no demand.
Right, yeah, there would be zero. There would be zero. It's not that there's no demand, there'd be zero supply.
Yeah.
So if we put a price ceiling that low, we would essentially be getting rid of all of the good on the market by the artificial price controls. That would not be good for consumers or producers.